apyayantu mamangani vak pranashchakshush balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam mama brahma nirakuryam mama brahma nirakarot anirakaranam astvanirakaranam me astu tadatmani nirate ya upanishatsu dharmaste mai santu te mai santu om shanti shanti shantihi. Our last session we spoke about qualities of consciousness, and we used a certain example of the appliance which had two parts to it, and we're going to reiterate those two parts for revision. The first part was, we said that everyone is, as a metaphorical comparison, like an appliance. So now let's take that example of an appliance, specifically a light bulb, to discriminate between what is the comparison between a jiva and consciousness. So let's take a light bulb. If we take a light bulb, the light shines when the electricity goes through the filament. That means the light bulb in itself does not function without the electricity. So that is what? A comparison of the light bulb being matter and the electricity being a comparison to consciousness. So that means the appliance, the jiva, the body, mind, intellect, without consciousness is inert. It's only when consciousness pervades the body, mind, intellect that the body, mind, intellect takes on the function for which it is built for. For example, without consciousness, the body cannot neither perceive nor act. Without consciousness, the mind can neither feel nor experience emotions. Without consciousness, the intellect can neither think nor discriminate. So that means that when consciousness pervades the body, which is the perceiver and the doer, the mind, which is the feeler and the one that experiences emotions, and the thinker, which is the intellect, which is the thinker and the discriminating power, then those functions take on the functions for which they are built for. So that means neither the perceiver, the actor, the feeler, the emotions, the thoughts, or discrimination belong to consciousness. They belong to what? The body, the mind, and the intellect. So, and we can use another very interesting example. Without, let's say, a steam engine. Without the steam engine is insentient. It's got a potential for a locomotive maneuver. But it's only when the steam comes into, that is, pervades it, does that potential take on the locomotive action. Similarly, the body, mind, intellect without consciousness is a potential, but it only takes on its function, perceiver, actor, feeler, thinker, discriminator, when consciousness pervades it. So that means without consciousness, your body, your discrimination, your intellect, your emotion are virtually insentient. So that means what? The body, the mind, and the intellect borrow their sentiency from consciousness. And therefore then we say, I, the body, mind, intellect, am conscious. But it's what? The body, mind, intellect superimpose over consciousness, and then consciousness, Brahman, takes on the body, mind, intellect, and then Brahman claims, I am this thought, I am this feeling, I am this emotion, I am this body. Ouch, I got hurt. Why? Because the body is superimposed over the self, therefore the self thinks
the self got hurt. Where we just said the self is that which pervades the body-mind intellect, and the body-mind intellect, that is the perceiver, actor, feeler, emoter, thinker, and discriminator, do not belong to consciousness. They belong to the steam engine. The steam in itself, only when it pervades the steam engine does the engine become a true functioning engine. You understand? Okay, so that's a metaphor to describe and to help us to discriminate between consciousness, Brahman, and the function which plays and engages with the world, which is the body, mind, and intellect. So that means, let's take a real-world example. If a human being identifies mainly with their gross body, we all met people like this, what's going to happen? They're going to likely be motivated to, what is the body? A perceiver and an actor. A body is what? The five senses. So that means a person, a body, mainly identified with the gross is going to be motivated by sense stimulation, that is, indulgence in the physical senses, accumulation, aggrandizing, procuring. In other words, lifting one's status, accumulating, experiencing sense pleasures. Similarly, when a person is linked or associated or identified mainly with their emotion, the mind, what's going to happen then? What do we say about the mind? It's a feeler of emotions. We call that an emotional person. But it doesn't mean it's either good or bad, because it's one step higher than the physical. The physical's interest in a party is about how can I satisfy myself, my senses, whereas an emotional person in that same party is thinking, how can we all just have a good company? That's why we have different personalities. We have different people, but they're different interests. Some people are talking to you about feelings, but you're totally disinterested because you're probably operating from either from the body level or from the intellect. Now we go even higher. We go intellect. That means a person identified with the intellect is going to be mainly engaged or interested in deeper subjects, that is deeper conversations, and we all met people like that too. So that means, practically speaking, the whole job is to lift the personality, that is the four personalities, the physical to the emotional to the intellectual, and then finally what's the fourth personality? The intellectual to the spiritual. So now I'm going to read you a text that's going to help us understand the qualities of these three personalities. This comes from Chinmaya. I'm in Chinmaya school, Vedanta, so I'm just borrowing this from their text. All right. So a human being predominantly assumes one of the four personalities, depending on his or her identification with their particular equipment called antakarana. Antakarana is the subtle body. Physical being lives largely at the level of the sense organs. She or he is happy when the organs are fed properly and sorrowful when they are starved. He or she is totally dependent upon the environment like any animal. Such a person has no capacity to experience emotional joys or intellectual satisfaction. So that means if you provide them an intellectual conversation, they'll just walk away. It's just not their cup of tea or coffee, whichever way you prefer. An emotional being has emotions and feelings which are superior to sense gratifications of the physical body. A person dwelling in the realm of emotion easily sacrifices his or her physical needs, since the mind thereby experiences a higher quality of joy and satisfaction. Okay, now we have the intellectual. The individual who possesses an intellectual ideal, such a person will easily sacrifice physical and emotional needs for the sake of an ideal which he or she cherishes. By doing so, they enjoy a far superior state of contentment and joy when he or she would have gained by catering to the other two lower personalities. Okay. We've also met people who are either on the extreme side, too emotional or stuck in the head. You heard of that? Stuck in the head. So that means the intellect is dominating at the expense of the mind and intellect being treated as less superior. So who needs the heart? What's this whole heart space? Just go and use your intellect. It doesn't work like that. We're talking about a balanced human being equally using or utilizing the three faculties. Now, what is a spiritual being? The fourth variety, this is even a higher being. The fourth variety of human beings is the spiritual being, whose attention is always centered around the conscious principle, which is the prime mover of all activities of the physical, mental, and intellectual levels. Okay, so now this summarizes and gives us a little bit more complement to the last session. And we learned so far 4 personalities of a human being. And the lesson is the evolution of a human being involves lifting oneself from the physical to the emotional to the intellectual and finally to the spiritual. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so now we're going to begin the next topic. And I want to do some revision with you guys, just because we're going to go deeper into the Gita, and I want to make sure we all have the same knowledge of terminology. What is Dharma so far, as we have learned? Any hands go up for what is Dharma? We talked about Dharma before. Duty, very good. Any other keywords, words? Dharma. We talked about Swadharma, Loka Sangraha, and Samanya Dharma. Remember that? Okay. Responsibility, very good. Okay, that's it. Duty and responsibility. The term Dharma is one of the most intractable terms in Hindu philosophy. Derived from the Sanskrit word dhar, to uphold, sustain, support, it denotes that which holds together the different aspects and qualities of an object into a whole. Ordinarily, Dharma has been translated as religious code, as righteousness, as a system of morality, as duty, as charity. But the original Sanskrit term has a special connotation of its own, which is not captured by any one of these renderings. The best rendering of this term Dharma is law of being, meaning that which makes a thing or being what it is. For example, it is Dharma of the fire to burn, of the sun to shine. Dharma means, therefore, not merely righteousness or goodness. It indicates the essential nature of anything, without which it cannot retain its independent existence. For example, a cold, dark sun is impossible, as heat and light are the dharmas of the sun. Similarly, if we are to live a truly dynamic or man or woman in the world, we can only do so by being faithful to our true dharma. So that's where the term swadharma comes in. That is, my swadharma is different from your swadharma. And as Krishna says to Arjuna, living and fulfilling somebody else's swadharma is worse than death. And this happens very often with the conflict between parents and children, where the parents will have children, they will see children starting to do the most intense things, putting tattoos, having sex early on, going to these parties, into drugs, and then parents get very concerned. But you know what? If the kid, now this is hard to hear, if the kid doesn't fulfill that, that is worse than death, literally. The kid has to play out their unfinished karma, which they're drawing from their, quote, past life. Now, this is where parents impose their swadharma onto the kid. In other words, here's how I believe or I think you, my kid, should live. So there's this fine line between a child being a parent and also letting the kid understanding that the kid has nothing to do with the parent. All right. So now, and the Gita explains to me my dharma. That's the purpose of the Gita. That's why I said at the beginning, the Gita is two things, Dharma Shastra and Moksha Shastra. That is, what is my dharma? How do I play out in the most efficient, effective way my dharma? And Moksha Shastra, that is, how to, quote, arrive, I put it in quotes because it implies duality, arrive to Sarvam Brahmaha, that everything is Brahman, that I am not separate from you, and similarly, likewise. Okay. Let's define the words real and unreal. Now, we have already established that the self is the real, and that is Satya, and Mithya is apparently real. That means it's only real until it's no longer real. So now, let's define, by the way, this text is from, it's an advanced, the Gita reference guide from one of my teachers in Chinmaya Foundation School. I didn't bring it here, but it's extremely technical, and I'm just bringing it forward because it covers some aspects of chapter 2, which we are now on. Okay, so what is unreal? That which was not in the past and which will not be in the future, but that which seemingly exists only in the present is called the unreal. Only in the present. So that means even this satsang is not going to what? Remain permanent. So even this is unreal. But what is that which is real? That's the natural question. Let's read. Define real. Real is that which defies all changes and remains the same in all periods of time, the past, present, and the future. My teacher James, he was having a conversation with one of the ladies who she was an expert meditator. She's been meditating since 10, and she's been to all of these different worlds, and she could travel, and she knew all about how to navigate herself in these portals, these different gateways. And she came up to James and said, every time I'm traveling, I feel like there's something watching me. That's what she said. I feel like there's something watching me when I'm kind of traveling. And James said, that which is watching, that's you. She's like, really? That's right. That is you. And she thought she was being watched. But the watcher was her. You see how knowledge is needed to discriminate between the witness and that which illuminates the witness? Yeah. Okay. So then she went back home, and she came back, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, and she knocked on the door, and the door got open, and she was just glowing. And she said, I am the self. So that means that when we explain this knowledge, it becomes very clear that I am that which never changes, always remains the same, no matter what. All right. Now, let's talk about yoga. This word flies around in the spiritual world, so let's define what yoga is. What are the 2 definitions of yoga given by Sri Krishna in the 2nd chapter? All right, so first he says, Samatvam yoga uchyate. So that means yoga, he explains to Arjuna, yoga is an equilibrious, an equipoise of the mind. Now, what does an equipoise of the mind mean? And the best way to explain this is to take the opposite. And that is to say, what happens to a lake? Just imagine your mind is a lake, a very tranquil, still lake. What happens a lake that is not tranquil? Can you imagine that? a lake that is not completely still, completely flat, yeah, what happens? That means what? Pebbles are being thrown at it. So that means yoga, that is equilibrious mind, a mind of equipoise, is one who has an absence of these ripples which cause agitation and disturbance to the mind, preventing self-inquiry. Because every time I inquire, it's like what? Instantly the ripple carries that inquiry away. So that means the mind has to be worked on. That's why yoga, when we now think of it, it means an equipoise of the mind. Okay. Evenness of the mind, or equipoise. Now, these ripples, as we just explained, are comparable to our vasana. Now, vasana is like as I said, a fragrance. If you think about a fragrance, if you walk into an aromatherapy shop and let's say they have sage or basil or rosemary, it almost changes your mood, doesn't it? Instantly. So that means vasana is exactly the same. Whatever vasana fragrance is shining on the mind intellect, it affects the mind and intellect according to the fragrance of the vasana. In fact, you can even say that every person has a fragrance of their own. Every person has a different kind of smell about them. That's also comparable to a vasana. That means they're exuding a certain aroma about them. Just like a vasana affects the quality and the texture of the mind according to the vasana's fragrance. And that fragrance can, if it's appalling, it's as good as what? Revolting the mind. The mind just gets revolted by the smell. So the mind cannot settle. All right. Now, the second, we have yoga karmasu kaushalam. Okay. Now, this is when chapter 2, verse 50, line 2, Krishna says to Arjuna, Tasma yogaya yujaswa, yoga karmasu kaushalam. Okay, now, yoga karmasu kaushalam means skill in action. Now, this is a huge topic in itself because the word skill is often misinterpreted. When we read the skill, if a normal person reads the word skill, they think yoga is being good at something, like having a high caliber at something. It has nothing to do with that. That's why I'm going to put this at the end, because we're going to hopefully get onto that line alone. Okay. Now let's go on to 36. So now we have talked about two terms of yoga. So now that leads us to ask, how do I know that I have attained yoga? And that's what Arjuna asks Krishna. And Krishna says, Shruti vipratipanate yada sthasyati nischala samatha vachala buddhis yada yoga avapsyasi. Okay, so that means when one is said to have attained yoga, that is a qualifier. That means when your intellect, though perplexed by what you have heard, shall stand immovable and steady in the self, then you shall attain self-realization. Now think about what this means. That means you could have a doubt, it doesn't touch you. You could have a hesitation about who you are, it doesn't affect you. Why? Because you're so firmly established in the self, as the self, that no matter what ongoing thoughts keep coming, and they will keep coming, it does not touch me, consciousness. Because why? It's just another superimposition, that is matter, which is talked about, body, mind, intellect, onto Brahman. And the body, mind, intellect is nothing but content. And the content never ends, because Satya and Mithya are always together. So there's no point trying to eliminate the world. Only understand who am I. and by that understanding discriminate consistently satya from mithya, self atman from not self anatman. Okay, so now we have a little bit of an further explanation. It says, the mind gets agitated mainly due to the flooding of the ever new rush of stimuli from the outer world. We can all relate to that. Sense organs are the antenna through which the world's tickling signal creeps in and disturbs the mental pool. One is considered as having attained yoga only when one, even midst of enjoying sensuous pleasures, and even while the sense organs are letting in a flood of stimuli, does not get at all disturbed in one's inner serenity and equipoise. So that means that this is not about isolating oneself and staying in an ashram as to prevent potential disturbance of the mind. This means being fully amidst the world and yet none of the world's offerings, that is the stimulus, consistently received through the ears, skin, eyes, nose, and so on, which you cannot stop, it does not affect the equipoise of the mind. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so let's return back now and talk about what are the two expressions of Maya. So this means, how do I know that I am under the spell of Maya? How do I know that I am tricked by Maya? So now let's see what it says. At the intellectual level, Maya expresses itself as a film of doubt and hesitation. So let's stop there. Is there a doubt ever about who you are? That's Maya. Do you ever hesitate whether this knowledge is incorrect or correct, or there could be more to this? That's Maya. Do you ever hesitate or doubt whether you have really found the truth, you have found a proper means of knowledge? That's Maya. This never ends. That means
it kind of contradicts the word attained then, isn't it? When you say attained something, but this is a continuous process. You keep attaining it again and again and again.
Yeah, attain can be two words. Attain can be when all ignorance is fallen away. We could say that's an attainment of yoga or moksha, when there's just no hesitation or doubt anymore. And the other attainment can be an expression of I've attained knowledge. I have attained in terms of self-knowledge, which is a natural consequence of the first one, removal of ignorance. So attainment of knowledge has an effect of removing ignorance. So whichever way we look at it, attainment actually leads, or is meant to at least imply that ignorance has been removed. But also, if you look at it from another angle, attain can be really, dangerous word, because it implies that I'm already not it. So now I have gained some new status. So it cannot really be attained, because it is already attained. You already are it. So there's nothing to attain. Right? So it depends on the context. Okay. At the intellectual level, Maya expresses itself as a film of doubt and hesitation in our understanding or experiencing of the self within us. Very beautiful, clear, succinct definition, meaning that, as I said, whatever doubts at any time come, or whatever hesitation, it's just what Maya is. It's an expression of Maya. Okay. Now it says this expression of Maya is called the Avarana Shakti, the veiling power, equivalent to Tama Guna, which is the veiling power. When present, it conceals. Just like when the cloud is present, despite the sun still being present, it apparently seems like I don't know who I am. The reason I say apparent, because that's actually not true. The fact that I say I don't know who I am, that means I still have to know that. So that means awareness is still present, because awareness is that which knows about the ignorance. So therefore we say apparent. Clear? All right. So now we have veiling power, avarana shakti. Due to the mist of ignorance that envelops the intellect, when it is unconscious of the spiritual reality behind it, the mind starts projecting forth the world of the anatma, not self, and creates two firm ideas that A, the world is true. That's what a samsari is. That's why samsari is constantly participating in the world, getting involved in gratuitous things, because they believe it's true. If I knew that it wasn't real, I would have no motivation to pursue the world. But samsari believes the world is real, therefore there's an invested interest to make the world work for the samsari, despite the fact that a samsari does not have any control. Just like a wave in the ocean has no control where the wave or which direction the wave moves. It's only when the jiva's free will comes up that the jiva starts to justify that I am indeed in control, when in fact a jiva has zero control. And this is one statement that the ego does not like to hear, that you do not have control. We will start investigating this more, because it is only when you completely surrender to God, that is Ishvara too, can all desire and fear vanish away. Fear and desire only continues. Why? Because the jiva, believing it's separate from the ocean, has a vested interest to continue its existence or its good opinion about itself, which it has projected onto the world, and therefore it would do everything in its power to sustain that imaginative idea of itself. But it's only when it collapses that idea can it finally be completely taken amidst the beautiful wind of Maya into the divine expression, which is already who you are. This is called freedom. So that means a samsari is nothing but the one that's holding on an idea that it is a part, which ironically causes suffering. Because the wave can never be apart from the ocean. Ever. The wave is of the ocean. There is no wave without the ocean. All right, so now the world is true. That's what this causes. And B, that I am nothing other than the projected world. This is Maya's expression as projecting power, Raja Guna, Vikshepa Shakti. Raja Guna, which is Vikshepa Shakti. This happens constantly in relationships. One projects onto the other, and then they have what? An expectation of how the one is supposed to perform according to my vasanas, which are nothing but likes and dislikes or conditionality acquired from the past. And then if that person does not fulfill that like, then what? I have a suffering. That is what? We talked about this right from chapter 1. Raga, shoka. Raga, mental disturbance. That's what a samsari is. How do we know you're a samsari or a person is a samsari? I have a mental disturbance, which is shoka, caused by raga, expectation or attachment to what? People, things, ideas, what things are, how things are not. So that means what? Raga, that is attachment, and shoka, mental disturbance as a result of attachment, are because of the avarana shakti and vikshepa shakti. So see how they're entwined together? So this therefore creates the experience that I am separate and that I need to what? Make the world work for me, which is impossible because the world is constantly changing. As soon as you make it work, that which you make work is already changed. And even the one that's trying to make it work, even their own mind or idea about what is pleasant is going to change. So it's a constant cycle in something that one cannot win at. Welcome to Maya. All right. Now this will be very helpful because we're talking about Bhagavad Gita, which is taken from 90,000 verses Mahabharata, somewhere in the middle between chapter 25 and 42. And we want to know what is the actual analogy of the Bhagavad Gita. Like, what is the metaphor of Arjuna, Krishna? What does it actually mean? Now, many of us would think that Arjuna is separate from Krishna. That's a dualistic thinking. But remember, there's only one of us here. So Arjuna and Krishna are not separate. It's one person, you. So now let's see what it says. Standing between two forces, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, the good and the bad, arrayed for a battle to death, Arjuna, the Jiva is what? Gross body, subtle body, causal body, or the 5 sheets. All right, so he's standing between the two armies. Arjuna, the Jiva, surrenders completely to the Lord, the subtler, discriminative intellect. Who is that? Krishna. That's the symbolism. When the stunned and confused ego, Arjuna, totally surrenders to Krishna, the Lord, with a smile, reassures the Jiva of its final victory and declares the entire message of spiritual redemption for the Gita. In other words, thank God that Arjuna didn't get it. Because if Arjuna got it, we would not have the Bhagavad Gita and this class would not be happening. So we can all thank Arjuna for that.
That's a question. So when you just said then that Krishna is the higher intellect, discriminating intellect, is that buddhi as well?
So we got the intellect is the buddhi, man is the manas. Intellect is the buddhi.
So where's Krishna in relation?
Krishna is here. Okay, so at one of the, I think it was class 2 that I said that the intellect in this entire journey is the most important factor because the intellect is the one that discriminates the Atman, self, from Anatman, not self. So therefore, the answer to your question is Krishna equals intellect. Yeah. Okay, now, when the spiritual redemption of the Gita, all right, when the ego, that is Arjuna, in its dejection sits back in the chariot, then the charioteer, whom is Krishna, the pure intellect, the pure, not contaminated intellect, not rajasic intellect, tamasic intellect, sattvic intellect. That's why we say 99% of this involves purifying the mind. It's only because of the pollutant of the mind that the intellect has trouble discriminating me from that which is not me, even though both are me. But that comes later. Satya from Mithya. Then the charioteer, the pure intellect, shall lend the ego a divine strength and guide it to the ultimate victory over the forces of adharma, which are the Kauravas, the bad guys, with the help of the dynamism of dharma, Pandavas. We read what dharma is. We know what dharma is now. Even though the former seems to be much stronger in force than the simple-looking dynamism of the later. It's always like that. The former, the bad guys always seem to be much stronger, but in the long run, it's the good guys always win. Where's the Roman Empire now? They were the largest, most strongest empire in the world. They survived for, I think it was 900 years. 900 years, huh? Where are they now? That was back then when we didn't have guns and all sorts of, protective mechanisms. Where are they now? That means Ishvara is taking care of everyone. You do not have to worry. It's just playing its course and it's nothing lasts in Mithya. All right, so Arjuna, therefore, is the Jiva, our ego. Shri Krishna is the discriminative intellect. The Kauravas are the forces of adharma, and the Pandavas is the forces of dharma. Very simple. Okay, let that sink in. What is the ego? Let's investigate. The self getting reflected in the intellect, that's why intellect is mainly yellow. The body and the senses is the ego. The body, that is the gross body, and the subtle body is the ego. It is the ego which is a victim of the world of objects, feelings, and ideas. To this ego belong all the sad destinies of life, as well as its fleeting thrills of acquisition and possession. Okay. So now I'm going to describe to you, the question comes up, what holds our ego? What causes the ego to stay alive? Okay. What is this? Candle. Okay. Now we have a wick in the center of the candle. And we have wax. And it smells too. Very nice. It's a vanilla wax. Now, what do we say vasana is? Fragrance. That's why it smells. So that means the wax is the vasana. And the wick is the ego. So now, why is the wick, the ego, that is erect? Why is it erect? Because it's being held by what? The wax. By the vasana. So now, what happens if we light the wick with fire of knowledge? Not only does the wax melt, but as we keep lighting and adding more knowledge, which what? Exhausts the ignorance or the vasana, and therefore the ego surrenders to what? The Lord, to God. So that's nice, very nice metaphor. Why does our ego just keep persisting? Because of our vasanas, which keep feeding the ego, because it's a fragrance, and the ego loves to smell its vasanas. Yeah. So that means that fire of knowledge, which is what we're here for, is what burns out the ego and the vasanas. Now, the ego is never going to really burn out completely, because the ego simply means the doer. You see, even this character now speaking is the ego. What you're now looking at is the combination of the intellect, the mind, and the vasana. Because see, I could see this character could be now speaking in a much more calm way, in a much more enthusiastic way, in a much more serious way, in a humorous way. So that means ego is just an expression of what? The vasanas affecting the intellect and the mind. So that means we can consider or categorize the vasana into two categories. One, natural, two, unnatural. Just like we can categorize desire into two categories. Natural, unnatural. Example. We all just need to eat, for example. We all eat for sake of survival. So that's a natural desire. But what happens if some kind of distortion, we develop an emotion or some kind of addiction to the food? We're still eating, but now we have turned what was natural into something that is unnatural. Understand? So similarly with communication. Communication is what we all do. We use our vak, our speech, to communicate. But there are some people who just love to talk. So they've taken what is natural into something that is unnatural. So that means we can take anything that is natural and turn it into what is unnatural by the help of vasanas. And these vasanas are what keeps the ego, that is blah, 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 constantly erect. And therefore whatever it is, unnatural, the diet, the food, the expression, the way of just communicating, the way of survival, it just never ends. It has an unbalanced ratio. Same with money. People need, we make money to survive, but it can also turn into an unnatural vasana, into more. Yeah. Okay. Now, so that's the ego. Now let's talk about the self. It is described as unknowable. Now what does this mean, unknowable? Apremya. Aprameya. Does that mean that the self ever remains unknown? Because it says unknowable. By qualifying the self as unknowable, it is not in any sense intended to indicate that the Supreme Self is unknown. The term unknowable is only meant to express that it is not knowable through the usual organs of perception. Okay, now, right from the beginning, it was chapter 2, we read here, subject which is not subject to objectification. That means you cannot objectify consciousness, because the one is trying to objectify consciousness, that one is also consciousness. You cannot objectify that which you already are. And we say this right from the beginning, is that the self cannot be known, because it implies a subtle phenomena of duality. Like there's an I, Jiva, who knows about some fact of the self, which is another separation. So it's a matter of what? Accepting what? That I already am the self. Now this is where the trouble is that the mind cannot accept I am the self, because it is so conditioned to believing that it's the body, the mind, and the intellect. So it always creates, remember those two words, doubt and hesitation. Product of what? Maya. You see how you're always up against Maya? So that means what? Listening over and over until ultimately you can just say, look, I have heard enough, I know enough, and I've clarified enough facts, and I know Ishvara well enough that I can say now, without it implying that I'm what? An ego claiming it, but through an understanding, I already am what I'm seeking. I already am consciousness, because there's no other choice. Remember what we said? There's only the ocean, the wave, and the H2O. Wherever there's a wave, it's permeated by the H2O. There's nothing but the H2O, appearing as a seemingly separate wave. But it's not a wave, is it? It's actually H2O. So that means that samsari identifies with the wave, and yet the one has self-knowledge, established firmly in it, is acknowledging that despite it appearing that I am a wave, it does not matter, because that is a trick of Maya through Vikshepa Shakti and Avarana that is projecting power, and the Tamaguna, the veiling power, which continues, but that doesn't matter, because that does not touch consciousness. In fact, it's only because of consciousness which pervades these two powers can these two powers be known for what they are. So that means even Maya depends on consciousness. All right, where are we now? So that's what the self is. So it's described as unknowable. So that's why science will, as I said last week, cannot come up with, cannot agree, because science relies on inference and perception, which are not sufficient devices for knowing the self. Because the self is the subtlest of the subtlest. And perception and inference are more gross. And the gross can never know the subtle. Only the subtle can know the gross. Understand? That's why we need the Upanishads. All right, we read this. Now, before we get into the text of Karma Yoga, let's talk about a common question, which is, why do we have multiple paths in the spiritual world? It's a fair question. Why is it not possible to prescribe a single spiritual path for all people? People fit for spiritual discipline fall under two distinct categories: the active and the contemplative. So you already know who you are. Are you the active type? Give me something to do. Or are you the type that can very well inquire, self-inquire? Temperamentally, these two classes fall so widely apart that to prescribe for both of them one and the same technique for individual development would be to discourage one section and ignore its spiritual progress. In other words, what it's saying is no two paths suit the same person. So that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, we're now on Karma Yoga, and then section 2 is Jnana Yoga, knowledge, and then section 3 is unconditional love. What is unconditional love? And how to, quote, gain unconditional love, even though you already are that, called Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion. Now, what did I just say? Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. 3 yogas. What do we have here? Mind, intellect, ego. 3 parts. So that means Karma Yoga is meant to exhaust the what? The ego, the doer. Because karma means what? Action. And what is action? It's for the doer, the one who thinks is doing. I think I am inquiring. I think I am doing. I think I'm saying. I think I'm going. I think I'm shopping. I think I'm sleeping. I think I'm awake. I think I'm thinking. I think I'm not thinking. I think I'm in pain. That's all doer. I think I am inquiring. So that means even the inquirer has to die, because even the inquirer is not you. So that means that Karma Yoga's purpose is to exhaust the doer, the ego. Remember what we said about the ego? So what's going to light this wick? Karma Yoga. But so will Jnana Yoga. So will Bhakti Yoga. Because it's all one package. We cannot separate them. But we can make subtle discrimination between the temperamentally suited for either those who want to do. That's the young generation. Give me something to do. Go to yoga world. It's all about young. You just do. Asanas, Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Give me a meditation. Give me a pranayama. Give me a dharana. Give me a dhyana. Give me a samadhi. That's the 8 paths of Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Now we have Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga focuses on what? Knowledge, which belongs to where? That's right. I heard you say it in your head. Intellect. And then finally we have the Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion, which is very absent, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, in the Western world. We have no devotion here. We devote ourselves to what? Objects. Power, possessions, nice house, nice car, money. So that means if one is emotionally, temperamentally suited or oriented, then we prescribe Bhakti Yoga to you. And yet we cannot separate any one of them, because they all lead to what? Unconditional love, which you already are. So that means Karma Yoga is meant to exhaust the ego, Jnana Yoga is meant to purify the intellect, and Bhakti Yoga is meant to purify the mind, that is to remove the ripples from the lake, so that it can be completely still, and that I can plant the seeds of self-knowledge and let them fructify into a firm basis of self-knowledge. I can claim, yes, I am self. Okay. How does ignorance express itself? Okay, so now the question is, there's ignorance. Now, how do I know that ignorance is being expressed in my predisposition? Ignorance, avidya, when it functions in the intellect, expresses itself as desires. Do you have desires for something? Yeah, most probably. Now, we're not talking about natural desires like just simple survival or simple eating or simple breathing. We're talking about those unnatural desires. That is, I want a particular place, I want a particular kind of man, woman, I want a particular relationship, or whatever it is. That is desire implying what? Remember what I said, desire and fear are always together. Desire is a negative fear, a fear is a positive desire. If I want, why do I want? Because I actually don't want its opposite. Why do I not want poverty? Because I actually want money. Why do I want money? Because I don't want to feel poor. I don't want to be, I don't want lack of security. So desire and fear, Tama and Raja, they are twins. Terrible twins, always together. Okay, so avidya is expressed as desires. When the desires, which are nothing other than the ignorance, function in the mental zone, they express themselves as thoughts. These thoughts, when they express in the outer world, become action. All right, so here what it's talking about is a very simple demonstration. We would be something like vasana. Okay, we have vasana, that's our tendencies, our fragrance. Now, what is a vasana? The past. It's based on something that has been done in the past. Now, you're probably asking, okay, so a vasana is a result of karma. Karma is the destiny. Remember, prarabdha karma and purushartha? So that means what? When did the first vasana come? Because obviously the vasana depends on the karma, and the karma fuels the vasana. When did the first karma originate? Because the universe is only created because of karma. Karma means action. Karma is what instigates a vasana. Vasana is what causes the world. So when did the first karma come? And from where did it come? Because a karma to come implies something was done before it to generate the karma. There is no first. There is no first. That's the point. Our minds think there was a first. There is no such thing as first. It is an eternal creation. That means this creation has repeated itself trillions and infinite amount of times. There is no first to it. It's just a construct of the mind. Okay, so that means now, we're onto the topic of how does ignorance express itself. So let's now talk about that. Let's say I have a vasana for speaking slow. Just speaking really slow, like Osho, or maybe not. Now, so speak slow. Now that causes, that vasana, that tendency causes and affects the intellect. Because see, we have the vasana and right underneath we have the intellect. So now that causes the intellect to contemplate a thought of speaking slow. So that means the thought now starts to entertain like a ball, like a nebulous ball of thoughts. What's it like to speak slow? So then the intellect affects the mind, the emotion, because the intellect always draws from the emotion, and emotion always fuels the intellect. They're together. So that means then it sends a signal to the mind, and then the mind sends the signal to the ego. The ego is the doer. And then the ego sends its signal to the 5 organs of action, which is the speech, hands, sex, feet, and anus. And that finally expresses itself in the gross body. Another example, let's say gambling. So let's say a person has done gambling before. So now there's a tendency to gamble. So when that tendency comes, it's going to cause the intellect to start entertaining gambling. That's why we have the eye. And then the eye, the gambling, is going to have an associated emotion to it, which is probably in the form of a pleasure of some sort. So now the mind is going to fuel that intellect, and then the I and the M, the intellect and the mind, are going to then send that signal to the ego, to the doer, and then the ego sends finally to the body, and then the body ends up what? Getting up into the car, driving to the gambling house. So that's the order of how a human being consistently does what a human being does. Vasana, intellect, mind, action. Vasana, intellect, mind, action. Okay. So that's the end of that technical manual. All right, we've got a couple more minutes and that's perfect timing. We're beginning now the topic of Karma Yoga. So now this is a new topic completely. It's actually a link to what we spoke about. But now I want to introduce how to implement Karma Yoga. Like, what is Karma Yoga? And give us an example of putting Karma Yoga into a very simple, day-to-day, ordinary practice without philosophizing about it. Okay. So Karma Yoga is a big topic. So this conversation will be just about a small example of Karma Yoga. It doesn't cover the whole Karma Yoga. It's just a small example. And in this example, the topic is of Karma Yoga, living a life of intention. That means, do I, as an individual, have an intention behind the action that I put forth into the world? Now, if there is no intention, what does that mean? There's only one choice. It's mechanical, it's autopilot. So that means what? It's a lack of mindfulness. It's a lack of using the intellect and the mind, and therefore the natural response is repeating the vasana, the tendency, in a mechanical way. So that means the action is done without a willful intent. And the Gita is very straight about this. Any action done without a willful intent yields no phala. Phala is a symbol for the fruit of action. In other words, the reward. So that means if I drive my car to work, or you drive your car, or you're on the train coming back home or here, and there is no intent behind that, that means what? There is no phala, there is no fruit. Now, what does fruit imply? What fruit are we talking about? We're talking about spiritual fruit. In other words, how to turn ordinary mundane actions into a life of spiritual development. So we begin by the topic of putting an intention behind our action. And without the intention, it's as good as saying, I have no goal. That is, I have no goal in life. Now think about what that means. If one just runs through life, there's nothing wrong with mechanical thinking. There's sometimes we need mechanical to get things done. But imagine a whole life invested in or being surrendered to a mechanical way of going about things. What does that mean? That means that I've pretty much, it's going to be a big statement, but it means that I have failed in life, basically. If I spend all my time in dharma, that is pursuing moral responsibility, if I spend all my time in kama, that is pursuing pleasure, and I spend all my time in artha, that is security, but I never pursued the fourth stage of life, moksha, you have failed. That's a strong statement. Because dharma is easy. Artha is easy. Kama is easy. In fact, we pursue them all naturally. Nobody has to be told to pursue artha, security, kama, pleasure, and dharma, responsibility. Do you have to be told that to pursue pleasure? No way. Even parents will tell you simple things, simple don't do do's. That's dharma. So it's everywhere. But if I spend my whole life in dharma, kama, and artha and never pursue moksha, it is as good as saying I have failed. That means that I could have started Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Yelp, IBM, Cisco, and so many other companies, and I never pursued moksha. I have failed. At least from the standpoint, if you know or you are aware of yourself beyond just being a single object that is a jiva, from that standpoint. If you believe you're a jiva, you haven't failed. But if you know there is more to you than just the jiva, then that is total failure, because then I've just indulged in a dream which never ends. So that's what these four purusharthas, purposes of life, are, which the Vedas have been very clear about since the beginning. And people ask, what is my purpose in life? And in Veda we had that since the beginning. Your purpose is dharma, artha, kama. And then the rishis came up with a special status, kind of a lofty term. They gave it moksha. So now here's a small logic. If you want to attain a goal, a small goal, that implies small effort, doesn't it? Small goals, small effort. If you wish to attain a medium-sized goal, that implies medium-sized effort. If you wish to attain a big goal, that implies a big effort. Now, where do you think moksha is in according to these three? Is moksha a small goal, a medium goal, or a big, off-the-charts goal? It's a goal that artha, kama, and dharma doesn't even do it justice. That's how big moksha is. In fact, it's such a huge goal that the effort required for moksha is 24/7. So now the question is, how am I supposed to do a spiritual or perform a spiritual life 24/7 when I have work, I have colleagues, I have life, I have just ordinary stuff? That is where karma yoga comes. And it's an ingenious solution given by Krishna to Arjuna, knowing that Arjuna hasn't got the knowledge, the self-knowledge. Remember we talked about self-knowledge? But Arjuna didn't get it. Krishna told him all about non-duality, all about consciousness, all about the self, and Arjuna still didn't get it. Why? Because Arjuna's temperament was still temperamentally suited as a doer, which is what the world is. We're doers. We're all about do. We think we are the doers. So therefore, Krishna gives Arjuna karma yoga to exhaust the doer, but in an ingenious way. So now, let's talk about what this way is. Okay. Karma yoga. This is a symbol, a very nice symbol I found, and it's going to become clear more and more what karma yoga is. See this on the top? It's like Ishwara on his laptop, keeping track of everyone's breathing or the whole entire world, as he's running. On whom? Us jivas. So that means the jivas are what? An offering, sacrificing, whether you like to that term or not, sacrificing to Ishwara. Now, see this jiva in the middle? This jiva has fully surrendered to the Lord. And guess what happens? The Lord is giving the jiva a nice back massage. You see? Wow, these jivas are imagining their own little world, that they are apart from the Lord. Even though they are completely at the what? A servant of the Lord, whether they like it or not. That's why we have karma yoga, because it moves your attention away from me, the selfish ego, small me, into a total acceptance. There is nothing but God everywhere. There is no one God, that's duality. There is no many gods, that's plurality. There is only God. And so karma yoga is what? An understanding through ordinary action that there is only God here and I am never separate from it. Just like H2O, the ocean that is God, and the wave that is the jiva, you cannot say they're separate. They all create what? This, as you're experiencing the existence. It's existence itself, appearing as a wave. Remember what we said at the beginning? When matter without consciousness, a light bulb without what? Electricity, is insentient. As when you add electricity, then what? The bulb has a function of shining. So that means consciousness without matter cannot experience. It can only what? Know itself as itself. But it cannot experience anything beyond that. When you add matter, Shiva Shakti, the sexual union, people think it's Tantra, so they kind of distort that. No, that's the union, the marriage of Shiva, consciousness, and Shakti, or Parvati, his wife, creating what? The experience of the world. So, similarly here, Karma Yoga is to get us to simply accept that there is only God here. And a very simple summary, Karma Yoga is brushing your teeth in a loving way. So what does this mean? It simply means, I put that picture there because brushing your teeth is very mundane, isn't it? It's just, we don't think about, how am I supposed to think about God while brushing my teeth? Please tell me. Okay, so now let's investigate. Okay, so we're taking mundane activities and we're transforming them into a spiritual sadhana. Spiritual sadhana, sadhana means practice. Sadhana is yoga. So that means that I can take anything ordinary, like driving a car, drinking my tea, brushing teeth, sitting down, going to the shopping mall, and I can turn it into a spiritual sadhana. Why? Why should I? That's what the ego now is going to say. Because, what do we say? There is only God here. So how can I treat one group of people higher or lower than another group of people if both of them are God? I went to a shopping mall just 2 days ago, filled up the fridge finally, and now you're saying, well, how did you apply Karma Yoga there? Very easy. I look at all these divine beings and I just appreciate them as myself. So it's mindful living. Instead of just going shopping, not only did I get my shopping done, but I also performed a spiritual sadhana by looking at all of these divine beings as myself and appreciating them as Ishvara. So that means nothing changes and yet everything changes simultaneously. It's called multitasking. Very good for Westerners. Okay. So now, this is where the chapter 2, verse 50 begins, when, as I said, Arjuna is scratching his head and he's heard Krishna talk about the self, what is the self and what the self is not. And Krishna just says, that's great, but what should I do? And then Krishna says, Tasmad yogaya yujasva yoga karmasu kaushalam. Now, the first line is a command. Tasmad yoga. O Arjuna, therefore engage in yoga. In other words, in the context of chapter 2, verse 50, O Arjuna, therefore engage in life. Not go elsewhere in the cave and contemplate on the self. Engage in life, that is what you're already doing, but a life motivated or driven by the thought or spiritual sadhana. That means, therefore, engage yourself in karma yoga in life, but for the sake of spiritual growth. How? That's the question. How do we do this? So now, Arjuna is going to naturally say, oh, okay, that's the new term I heard, yoga. What is yoga? And then Krishna says, yoga karmasu kaushalam. And then Krishna says, meaning, Yoga is skill in action. And that we will cover next week because it will require some time to explain and to put it into practice. What the word skill means and how to actually apply it. Okay.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi.
Well, even what you were saying with the Karma Yoga, you know, just using it in everyday life.
Yeah.
At times when I have done that, it actually totally changes.
It's what?
It totally changes what's happening in that moment.
Aha. Beautiful.
You know,
well said.
As you were saying, like
in what way does it change?
Well, using the supermarket as an example, where you know, sometimes you might be annoyed at someone whose trolley's in the way or something, but that totally goes when practicing that we're all divine beings and
yes,
that,
absolutely.
yeah,
I can see that.
The attitudes drop away.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're seeing them as me, so why should I project my stuff onto them? I'm projecting onto God. Yeah.
So I should say, whilst it seems simple, it's powerful.
It's simple, but it's powerful. That's the beauty of Karma Yoga. It's very ordinary, nothing mystical about it. It's for ordinary people, just ordinarily worldly people. We don't change our lifestyle. We don't, get out of a relationship or get into. We just remain exactly the same, but there's an underlining tone which creates just a smooth, graceful attitude about our transaction with the world. Yeah.
And yourself too, even the act of brushing your teeth, as if you're brushing Krishna's teeth.
That's perfect. That's beautiful. Yeah.
To treat yourself like that, I think, as the simplest act in the morning or in the evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm brushing.
To that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an opportunity, like because the point of Karma Yoga is to think about God 24/7, and when are we not doing? We're always doing something. So how about overlaying all of our actions as an expression of the Lord, of God. Just like with teeth, I'm brushing Krishna's teeth. And therefore now there's a different, like you say, there's a different attitude about it now. It's the same thing, but now there's something about it, like, oh, it's kind of interesting, I'm brushing Krishna's teeth.